Welcome back to our three-part podcast. Today's actually the final episode. This podcast is brought to you by M&S and YoungMinds, who are working closely together to support young people's mental health. My name's Dr. Alex George. I'm Youth Mental Health Ambassador, and my mission is to support young people's mental health. Now, October the 10th is World Mental Health Day, and it's a great opportunity for us to talk about mental health and how it affects young people, and importantly, how to look out for signs that they might be struggling and how to support them if you're a parent, you're a teacher, if you're a trusted adult. So it's a really important episode we're going to have. Today I'm joined by two very important people. I've got Ella Glow with me, who's a mental health practitioner, and I also have Hannah Kinsey, who joins us from YoungMinds. Thank you for joining me. How are you both?
Yeah, really good. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. You know, mental health is important all year round, and it's not a conversation we say for certain days, but I think it is important around certain, moments and opportunities for us to kind of highlight its need. And I think it's particularly important for young people. Ella, thank you again for joining us. Can you talk a little bit about your experience around mental health, both in the work that you do and also personally? Because I know you talk about it a lot on your social media.
Yeah, so I really struggled with my mental health as a young person. So in my teens, it was a real struggle for me, and I didn't really have people talking about it. Didn't have many adults talking about it as well. But I've managed to kind of get through that, and now I work with adults with mental health conditions, and I love what I do, yeah.
It feels, I think, rewarding, doesn't it, to work in this space? And we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges, but it is important to be, to have optimism where appropriate, and also to look at it in a way that this is something we can build upon, we can learn, we can develop, and I think as a nation that we can do better. Now, there'll be a lot of, parents, but also young people kind of watching this, and I think it's probably useful for us to start off with a bit of a definition of what is mental health? What is mental health versus mental illness? How do you know when we're looking at illness versus, a spectrum of mental health? I might start with you. What's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, trying to make it as simple as possible, particularly for adults, supporting young people, that's the most important thing. I think we all have mental health. Mental health is just like physical health. It can be good, it can be bad, it can change, from day to day. I think where particularly adults start to get concerned about, be it their child or a young person that they're supporting, is where it sort of starts to impact their daily life. So, we know that being anxious about things is normal. I had a bit of anxiety coming here to do a podcast today, but actually if that is starting to stop you from doing things every day, so you're stopping young people from kind of doing the activities that they love or from talking to their friends and stuff, then that's where, particularly as an adult supporting a young person, you start to get a bit concerned. It's that sort of behaviour that shows you that there is something underlying that's not going quite right.
We're going to talk a bit about how parents can kind of spot the signs and support, but let's start with the young person first. I mean, how do you realise within yourself that actually this is actually becoming a bigger problem? Okay, function's one part of it, but perhaps, Ella, you share a lot of your kind of experiences online and your experience of mental illnesses and struggles. When do you realise that actually this is a problem that I need support with, or this is something that is more than just, a normal variation?
You know what, I think I didn't realise, because no one was talking about it, I honestly didn't know how to recognise those signs within myself. And because we're not talking about it, or we weren't talking about it as kids or as teenagers, you almost think that this is normal, this is how we're supposed to be feeling. But then I think once I started to talk about how I felt, and then friends being like, oh, I don't really feel like that, that's I think when you kind of realise maybe there's something more going on here. And when it started to really impact my quality of life, and I wasn't excited about the future, I wasn't, wanting to get up in the mornings. Those are the things when you start to think there is something wrong here, rather than just kind of a low day or maybe just a normal dip in your mental health.
Are we getting better at helping individuals recognise when they need to get help sooner, or do you think that's still a challenge that we're facing?
I think it's definitely still a challenge. I think we're certainly getting better. Having sort of worked in the charity sector for a long time, we're definitely getting better than we were, sort of giving young people a language to talk about these things, because that can be the first hurdle. Like you said, Ella, it's like, I don't know what I should be feeling like, or is this normal, or actually if I don't have hope, is that just because I'm a teenager, or actually is it because there's something else? So kind of that like emotional literacy and teaching young people to really understand their own feelings and talking to their friends about those kind of things and spotting those kind of signs is definitely something that schools are talking about more. It's something that young people are sort of seeing more on social media, and people like Ella talking about those things is really impactful for that kind of thing. But I think we're certainly not at a place yet where there's no stigma around it, which is always going to stand in the way a little bit.
One of the stigmas I kind of hear quite a lot around education and school and that kind of emotional literacy is like, oh, but how young's too young, you know, but should we be talking about things like feelings when they're 4, 5, 6 years old? What's your kind of takes on that? And, you know, is there such thing as being too young to talk about feelings, do you think?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, no. I think a lot of people struggle to talk about how they're feeling. And for a child, to describe what's going on in your head is the hardest thing to do. And I think if we're not helping people to do that, it's preventing them from asking for help, and letting them sit with that all on their own as a child, as a teenager, is such a huge thing to carry. I think it should be spoken about a lot more.
Yeah. And it's how you talk about it, isn't it? It's, you know, you don't talk to a 4-year-old about depression or anxiety or that kind of thing. You just talk about feelings, and you normalise talking about feelings and going, oh, actually, that made me feel really proud or really great, because it comes along with being able to celebrate those good feelings and the good days that you have as well. But at the same time, being able to go, actually, that made me feel really angry or really sad. And if you can name those emotions and understand the normal levels of those emotions, then that's really important.
Just being able to like name what you're feeling is just a huge start. And I think that some of the bias of the negativity around is like the assumption is that we're always talking about negative parts of mental health, but mental health is that full spectrum, like we say with physical health. So a big part of it's also learning to like feel things like being proud and like recognizing that you're proud that you've done something well, as much as it's important to notice that you feel anxious and know what that is. And I think, you know, for me, like one of the disparities that we clearly see is between, you know, men and women in terms of like male mental health, and, you know, some frightening statistics that we see around male suicide, for example. And as triggering as that can be to talk about, I think it is important. You know, what can we do with the younger generation and education to start breaking down some of those traditional ideas that, you know, men can't speak and so on? Because I hear it a lot, you know, men can't talk. That isn't true. Men can talk about emotions. We need to give them the tools and skills to do that. And in many ways, I think, you know, society craves men to speak, but we train men to be very silent. And we do that because, you know, you hear things, certainly when I was growing up, it's like, big boys don't cry, man up, toughen up, you know, what's wrong with you? Like, and those kind of things train you to basically be silent. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about that and how that interplays with emotional literacy, and how we can build up the ability so that, you know, young people can have the words and the confidence to actually talk about how they feel.
Yeah, and it's really difficult, isn't it? I think there's a lot of I think a lot of it is about role modelling, and, you know, what you're doing is a really good example. It's kind of giving boys and young men really positive role models to go, look, this is somebody talking about where they've struggled, where they've done really well, and look, nothing's happened, it's great, people are celebrating it, we're talking about it. I think it is really important to make it a bigger part of schools all the way from as early as possible. So teaching boys that it's okay to reach out, it's okay to ask for help, kind of taking away some of those gendered ways that we talk about emotions and things. Emotions are completely gender neutral, you know, it's something that everyone should be able to talk about and should be able to name, but we need to kind of start breaking down those barriers straight away. And I think sometimes it's, you know, it's not just schools, it's families as well. There can be kind of a generational thing where, you know, if I think about my dad, he didn't talk about his emotions very much at all, and so there's a bit of kind of education to do with parents and things as well, and that kind of common language we're trying to give young people. If we do the same with the trusted adults and, you know, the parents and grandparents and people who exist around them, then it starts to kind of chip away at that a little bit.
Kind of building things. And from your experience, both in terms of your experience, and thank you for being so open about, you know, what you have gone through, but also from the professional side as well. You know, what can we do to improve that conversation? We think about, you know, men, you know, young boys and girls, but also, you know, thinking about tackling that stigma around male mental health.
I think it's just opening up the conversation, allowing someone that moment to say how they're doing. It's not so much like forcing that out of them, because some people aren't ready to speak. But I think what you said about starting young, that's that's the role model period. That's where it's a key period of their adolescence to learn that they can actually speak about their feelings. And if in schools that was a thing that was happening a lot more, I think boys would be growing up knowing that they can speak about how they're feeling, and that it's better to talk about it rather than keep it all in.
Yeah, exactly, and being able to open. Well, what about, you know, for parents watching who might think this is brilliant, but I actually I have not been given those tools myself. I mean, obviously that's partly why we're doing this, but it can feel, if you're not comfortable about talking about something, then we can naturally avoid that. So do you have any advice for kind of how to set up a situation where you can have a conversation? Maybe you've got a young person who, you know, they're being a bit quiet, they're not being themselves. You know, how can they set up that situation to have that conversation, especially if they're not someone that's maybe confident with it?
Yeah, and it's tricky, isn't it? I think sitting down, you know, chair on chair, staring each other down and having a conversation about mental health is really hard. But, you know, just making it part of conversation in everyday life. You know, how were things today? What were you proud of today? What did you struggle with today? If you were to do today again, what might that look like? So they're not sort of conversations that are about mental health as such. It's just sort of starting to drop in those little conversation starters, and it's often easier to do that whilst you're doing something else. So, you know, if you're, I don't know, cooking together, or you're taking the dog for a walk, or doing something that takes the pressure off sort of literally sitting down and kind of couching a conversation about mental health. And it might be that, you know, just like Ella said, you might be concerned about your young person, but they might not be ready to open up to you yet. And that's fine, because if you keep trying to have those conversations, it means that they're kind of thinking, okay, right, every day they're still checking in with me, I know they're still there, I know they still care, and it means that when they are ready to open up, it's much more likely to happen. So I think it's just kind of, it's doing those kind of things and making it part of the everyday, and not feeling, you know, like you have to make it about mental health as such. It's just about checking in.
To kind of making it, like, normalising it. I mean, there's a technique that I quite like, and I've heard about the traffic light system of talking about mental health, and I think as men, especially if you kind of really struggle with it, it can give you kind of a format to use. So, you know, we're all familiar with like red, amber and green, and so you can sit around the you know, breakfast table or dinner table and go around the room and say, well, I feel red, amber or green. We can all correlate as to roughly what those things mean. And then, you know, just saying a sentence or so of why you feel that way. And that's important for the good days. You can say, oh, I feel green today. Well, why? Because, you know, I saw my friends, and actually I'm up to date with my homework, I slept well. You're like teaching positive reasons of why, when you feel good, why it is you feel good. But then also, like, then it allows you to, you know, find an easy way to say I feel red, and maybe a sentence or so as to why you feel that way. And that teaches this ability to open up, doesn't it? And if you're doing that every day anyway, it becomes easier than just like if you never talk about mental health to suddenly say that I feel really bad, isn't it? And I guess, you know, so much of YoungMinds work is around kind of early intervention and even prevention. And I think the speaking point is important, because ultimately, unlike other things, maybe physical health, like mental health, you do actually require a lot of that person to communicate how they're feeling, don't you? It's really important. Ella, from, you know, the work that you do, you know, and I guess you've developed a lot of skills of how to speak to people. You know, could you share some tips about how you initiate conversations with mental health, or even like what kind of phrases or words can be used? Because people do worry about the language and what words they should use.
I think staying as non-judgmental as you can, because for someone to open up, it's a massive thing, and especially as a young person, they're already, you know, going over, why am I feeling like this? And then to have someone judge that, it's really gonna push them away. So I think trying to stay as non-judgmental as possible, just listening, maybe not trying to fix it straight away, because I think sometimes people, you know, think that someone's opening up because they want a solution, when really they just want someone to listen and to care. Especially as young people, you just want that care that every child needs. So I think going in pretty non-judgmental and not leading the questions, I think just, you know, doing some open questioning so that they have time to bring up what they want to bring up. You know, you might think it's one thing, but actually it might be something else. And trying to stay as non-assumptive, is that a word? And to not assume anything about what they're going to say, because it might be something completely different.
It's very difficult though, isn't it, as a parent, to kind of, when someone shares, when a young person is something that you care about, so you're clearly very emotionally invested in this person, and they go, you know, I'm really struggling, I'm in a difficult place. You want them just to feel better instantly, but the reality is we can't just fix things as easily as that. So how do you manage that as a parent? That kind of, because a lot of what we understand is that trying to fix things or trying to, say, no, things are absolutely fine, it doesn't necessarily help, but it makes us feel better. So how do you manage that as a parent?
With great difficulty, but I think being led by your young person is really important. Just like Ella said, if actually it's just, I just want you to listen for now. I don't want some advice. I don't want you to do anything else. I just want you to listen. So allow your young person to lead you a little bit in what they need. Do they need some space? Do they need your help to reach out for support? That's one thing that you certainly can do on behalf of your young person, is reach out for support as early as you think that's necessary. I think sometimes parents can be put off by hearing, you talked about the waiting lists and things at the beginning, and people go, well, what's the point in talking to a GP because I'm just going to be put on a really long waiting list? Well, actually, we know the sooner you get support, the better. So, if you feel like that's appropriate, then make sure that you kind of reach out to get that support. Ask the GP, ask the school, reach out to the community or friends, people who might be able to kind of help you in that way. And I think another really key thing for parents, that sort of listening non-judgmentally can be hard for a parent, not because they're judging their young person, but because they're judging themselves often. So we hear a lot from parents on the helpline that, is it my fault? Have I done something wrong? Is that why my young person is struggling? So also think about the other adults that exist in your young person's life that they could also talk to. Could be aunts, could be teachers, could be other kind of adults who they trust who could have those conversations. And I think also think about yourself too, because it's really hard supporting people who are going through something difficult. So self-care for parents and adults in that situation is really important. Make sure that you're giving time and space and support for yourself as well.
We're seeing a lot a lot of the research that YoungMinds have done shows that young people are facing a high prevalence, more mental illness than they've seen before. And actually the severity of some of the mental illness can be even worse. Why, from your perspective, what you've seen, why are we seeing these worse figures? Like, what do you see are the issues that are going on, and what's some of the solutions, I think, more systemically, I guess, for dealing with that?
We could be here a long time talking about all of the kind of reasons behind that. I think it's a really difficult place to be in the world for young people at the moment. I think we lived through a pandemic, which I think we still don't understand the impact that had in a really formative space of young people's lives, and we're only going to see that unfold more, I think, in the next few years. Compounded by a cost of living crisis, all of the kind of support that young people used to find through youth clubs and extracurricular activities aren't there anymore. Layer on top of that some issue, whilst social media is a great place for young people to connect, young people tell us themselves it's also quite hard to navigate. So there's layer upon layer, and that makes it harder to fix because it's a really multi-layered problem. But I think one key thing is connection, I guess, is if you feel connected to other people, to part of a community, it starts to take some of that pressure off.
Absolutely, and we know that connection is one of the most important things for young people. Ella, in your work, do you see kind of any patterns of what can be contributing to people struggling with mental health more these days?
I think what Hannah said, there's so many different factors coming into play. I don't think there's ever just one thing, but I think lockdown was a major contributor to that, because it was that period of isolation. You didn't have that connection, you weren't going out with friends, you weren't getting those positive emotions, and a lot of people felt so alone during that time. And it's hard to go from that and then it's back to normal life. And you're still kind of got those after effects of, oh, I'm a bit anxious now to see people. I feel a bit awkward. Do I have that many friends? I've lost a few friends, didn't really text them much over lockdown. So I think that definitely contributes to it. And also just financial issues, I think, and housing issues definitely come into play. There's so many different factors, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think with mental health, I think more what we're learning is that obviously mental health is where everyone has mental health, wherever they are, that's where mental health is, and is impacted by absolutely everything. So I'd like to talk now a little bit more on the side of building mental fitness, because of course mental health is the full spectrum experience. So how important is you mentioned the word self-care amongst parents, but for everyone, how important is self-care, and what are some of the things that people can do if you've never done that, you've never even thought about it? Where do you start with that?
Self-care looks really different for everyone. I think, there's sort of a classic trope of like, if you're struggling, just have a bath or go for a walk or whatever else, which, can work. But I think it's about finding out what brings you joy, and what gives you those glimmers of hope and things. And so, things like, we know that sleep for young people is really, really important. So trying to get good sleep is a really good way of sort of starting to build that self-care, and finding the things that work for you. So whether it's kind of being creative, whether it's spending time with friends, whether it's doing exercise, because we know there's a link between physical health and mental health, so looking after yourself in that way. Often when people start struggling, like their diet will struggle as well, and then their sleep will be impacted, and it kind of everything has a bit of a knock-on effect. So I think it's about everybody just really thinking about what are those little things that bring me joy, and trying to make space in every day for something joyful, whether it's like just 10 minutes worth of something, building it up over time, whatever that is, that's really important.
What brings you joy?
My daughter brings me lots of joy, and cooking brings me joy as well, and the two do not go together. She is not helpful in that situation.
I was going to say, is that like a shared bond around cooking?
Yes, but she's very messy, but
Chaos,
it's chaos, but it's good fun.
With the cooking, yeah. What's your favourite meal? What do you like to make together?
We make a lot of cakes together.
Very nice.
Because then you have a cake to eat at the end of it, so that's great, right?
That's actually a good part. It's a win-win. It's a twofold. You get the cooking and everything, and then you get something to actually enjoy at the end.
I love a walk. I love a walk and a podcast. Just going off, like I'll do that after work or before work. I just think having that time and listening to like a funny podcast or something that brings you a bit of humour. I think humour is such an important part, especially if you're working a stressful job and you just need like a laugh. Very, very nice time to just go on a walk, listen to a podcast. That's my favourite thing to do.
It feels like so much of like what we need to do to take care of ourselves are like fundamental things that we've kind of, I think, deeply always known that probably being connected is good, being in nature is good, moving a bit, eating generally well. Why have we lost that connection between the two? Because actually a lot of what we're rediscovering through like latest research and science are just generally things that I think all of us knew were important and true in the past. So where has that disconnect happened, and how do we make sure that within schools that we're really teaching this stuff? I mean, the science of mental fitness I think is fascinating to start with. I mean, we're only discovering half of it now, but how do we kind of reincorporate that so that we do see like the benefits? And actually, I want young people to be excited to build mental fitness. It's a brilliant thing to have, something to be proud of, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of when you have lots of other pressures in your life, it's really hard to think about yourself. If you're working 2 jobs or you're in sort of housing which is not great, those kind of things, then self-care is made much harder in those kind of situations and those sorts of pressures and things. But there was you talk about schools and that kind of thing. I think it's really key, and it's about everybody knowing their part in that and helping young people to kind of build that and connect to those things that are really important to them and giving them the opportunities. I think there's something about kind of equity of opportunity there that, for some young people it's much harder to connect to the things that they are going to find
like
a
nature,
passion
for.
Exactly, really hard to connect with nature, really hard to do sport, or, if you're a young carer and you have those kind of responsibilities, it's really hard for you to find things outside of your school day, for example. So the more that schools can kind of give opportunities for young people to discover things, so, to be creative, to find sports, to find, all the kinds of random extracurricular activities that they might love, then it's about being able to try on all of those things and see which one fits. But in order to do that, what I suppose the education system needs to do as well is kind of balance the pressure that it's putting on young people at the moment. Because if, you're kind of seen as, I'm just in school to get these grades and anything that I do outside of that sort of is secondary, then that's never going to happen. So that sort of rebalancing, where actually school is about setting young people up for life, and you set young people up for life by giving them the skills to look after themselves and the skills to sort of, be proud of themselves and be optimistic and have hope about things. And it's having a much more holistic view of what it takes to build a young person, I guess.
We hear a lot of the whole school approach to mental health. Maybe just building upon that, like, what do we mean by that when we talk about whole school approach? Because that does sometimes sound a bit confusing. So.
It does. I think again, if you ask lots of people, they'd probably say something different. But I think for us, it's about every single person within that school community knowing how they can help build young people's mental health, essentially. So often, you know, mental health initiatives will sit with particular people. They might sit with the head teacher, they might sit with the special educational needs coordinator, but actually what's really important is that every class teacher who might notice that a child is sort of slightly quieter one day than the next, that they know what that means in terms of mental health. It might mean that the receptionist, when that child is coming in late every day, doesn't just go, "Oh, you're late," and sort of shout at them, goes, "Oh, I'm really glad you're here," as, you know, "What happened this morning?" It's just taking a different view and making sure that every single person, from, like, you know, the janitor to the head teacher, knows about what mental health is, knows how to have conversations about it, and knows what they as a school are doing to kind of contribute to that positive mental health of young people.
Ella, you know, from like looking back to your school days, what do you think could have been, are there a few things that you wish would have been different, that would have made a difference in terms of like recognising the support that you needed and making it easier for you to reach out, thinking off the back of that kind of approach that we're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. I think I kind of went in the background a bit. People didn't really pick up on the signs for quite a few years, and I think I would have really benefited from early intervention, but sadly I didn't get that, and I now know that, you know, we should be looking out for those small signs of they are turning up late every day. Why? It's not because they're lazy. I think that's often the label is they're lazy or they don't care about school. I'm like, but why? Why are they struggling with time? I think those small signs, usually when they're building up, you can see the bigger picture. So I wish people had kind of just asked, like, are you okay? I think it's such a simple question, but doesn't get asked that much to young people, I think, because they often kind of assume that they're fine. You know, they're just kids, they're fine. But sometimes just having that open conversation, I think, would have been so helpful, because I think I had so much to say, but just didn't know how to communicate it, and just really wanted someone to ask me, and I think that would have helped so much.
As we come towards the end, we've got the final few minutes of the episode. I thought we could kind of summarise a few of these things we've covered. We've covered a lot in this episode so far, and perhaps we'll just, you know, focus around the part of any parents that are watching that are worried about a young person. You know, they're not being themselves. You know, maybe their energy is different. Maybe they're not being as engaged in conversation. Just a couple of tips about, you know, just having that conversation, about sitting down and asking them how they're doing. If you could just share just a few steps for them to kind of take away.
Yeah, of course. I think trust your gut is the first one. If you think that there's something wrong, then that's a really good indicator as a parent or an adult. So that's kind of step number one. I think, yeah, find a way to have that conversation, like I said, whether it's side by side doing something, whether it is sitting down, just asking young people, like Ella said, asking how are you doing, but with no judgment, no expectation on that, you know, not immediately, like you said earlier, sort of jumping to conclusions or assumptions, just asking some of those questions. We've got some really great conversation starters on the YoungMinds website for parents, just to, if you, like you said earlier, don't feel like you've got those skills to broach that subject, to be able to do that. So listen kind of non-judgmentally, give that young person space to talk to you. Know that it doesn't all have to be done at once. You know, you don't have to have these really big conversations all at once. It can be an ongoing thing where you go, okay, let's check back in tomorrow or the next day. I think know that you don't have to be an expert in mental health to have these conversations. You just have to have that relationship. That's really important. And then if you still don't know where to go or you're still struggling, then obviously there's YoungMinds Parents Helpline if you're a parent and you want to get support. Lots of information on our website, or reach out to, you know, your GP or whoever else it might be to get some support.
And always remember, we're all doing life for the first time, so there's no shame around asking for help, right? We're all learning as we go along. And Ella, perhaps switching this around a little bit, if you are a young person and you're going through a difficult time, you know, how can you reach out and ask for help? Any advice of overcoming maybe that stigma, or just the feeling of like, oh, who do I talk to?
I think someone that you trust and that you feel isn't going to judge you. You can communicate it in whatever way feels easiest. Like for me, I used to struggle with speaking about it, so writing it down, like a letter, you know, write down and then give it to your mum. If you feel that conversation is too awkward or too intense, write it down instead, or do a voice note or call someone rather than have that face-to-face interaction. And I think usually you will be met with like support and love and care, and especially if you have a supportive family or friends, and especially using like services like YoungMinds, for sure, I think that's definitely what young people should be doing.
Kind of like my mum says, a problem shared is a problem halved. So you feel so much better. There's almost a physical release when you talk to someone else for help. So that's brilliant advice. So, I mean, we're coming to the end of this episode. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me. And thank you to everyone that's joined us in the last 3 episodes. We've covered so much, thinking about challenges and changes at school. So moving from primary school to secondary school, the pressures that you can feel, thinking about social media and the role that plays. And now in this episode, thinking about mental health and supporting someone that needs help and so on. And just on that point, if you're a parent watching, take the pressure off yourself, be kind to yourself is very important. Keep having those conversations each day. Make mental health part of the conversation in the household. And if you're looking for support and advice, then head to YoungMinds website. If you're a young person, there's advice there as well about reaching out and asking for help, what you can do to support your mental health. There's also specific advice around parents as well. And of course, M&S have been doing fantastic work with YoungMinds, and they're looking to raise £5 million in the next 3 years, which will make a huge difference for YoungMinds and the incredible work that they're doing. I've seen much of that work over the last 6 years. They're making real progress, but we need funding to do that. And if you want support, then you can hit the link in the description to help. And we're very grateful for every bit of help that you provide. So thank you all for listening. I hope these 3 episodes have been useful to you. Thank you very much. Thanks to the guests. And of course, thank you to M&S and YoungMinds too. Take care, everyone, and goodbye.